So Selina here from the Way to Healthy Living, and you are with us here at the Empowerment Resource Center, and I am so excited. This past year, I welcomed Denise Jewell on board as the licensed marriage and family therapist because one of the things that I found out in working with people on weight loss and health and coaching were that there's a lot of other things going on in our lives that contribute to that. And what we're talking about this month is actually kind of the anxiety and the stress that comes in August, right, Denise?
Yes. And actually, Selena, I think that for kids going back to school, that stress and anxiety actually begins before August. I worked for many years within the school system, so I saw firsthand kind of that, the pressures that kids experience, but I also see kids throughout the summer. And kids that I've been seeing this summer have already begun to express to me anxiety about school.
You know, Denise, I can remember when I was a kid and I would be so stressed out about school or tests or whatever. I mean, friends, a lot of other things going on. And I think adults consistently say, well, what kind of stress do you have? You're a kid. So what would you say to that?
My goodness, kids have so much stress. Right? There's so many pressures from so many different angles, including their parent stress. A lot of times I think that parents don't recognize how much their children actually absorb and pick up. Mm-hmm. And so while you think that you may be talking about adult issues such as finances, job stress, whatever it may be, in a private way, where you think that your child is so absorbed in that video game because they didn't respond to you when you asked them to get up and clean their room. So you think, oh, their ears are turned off. They are listening to every word that you say. They're picking up on your body language. And it's so important that we recognize how our stress as adults affects our children, but also that we validate that they have their own sources of stress. Much more than we think they do, because we think, oh, they're just a kiddo,
Well, let's talk about the contributing, gosh, I can't talk, I'm sorry, the contributing factors to stress. And one of the things that we talked about was sleep. And you shared with me a very interesting, and I know it, but when you said it, I thought, wow, okay, we have to pay attention to that now. How many weeks does it take to adjust to that schedule change, Denise?
I think it takes at least 2 to 3 weeks for our bodies to adjust to a new habit. When we think of summertime, the school year can be very regimented. And sometimes kids are up late at night during the school year. But we can say in summertime, kids may be up until 2, 3 a.m., watching movies, playing their video games, or just hanging out, right? The school day, at the high school level, starts as early as 7:30 in the morning, 8 o'clock, right? And we know we need, 7 to 8 hours of sleep, if not more. When we have, for 2 months, been staying up until 3 a.m. and sleeping until 2 p.m., we can't expect our children or even ourselves to be able to, okay, you know what, tomorrow night you need to be in bed at 9 o'clock, and we need to get you up at 6 a.m. Well, that's all fun in theory, but the body physiologically needs to recalibrate and readjust. And it can be easier, not necessarily easy, to make that transition back to school if we can start adjusting back to that routine a few weeks beforehand.
So what would you recommend? Like, would you say like a half an hour early, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ahead? Or I'm thinking, okay, well, if I'm looking at the calendar, we're probably right on top of school right now. So it's a good time to start this now. But maybe in the first or second week of August in the summer, starting to look at making those adjustments as the day.
And I would say maybe even cutting out electronics. Maybe, okay, you don't have to be in bed at 9 o'clock tonight, but at 9 o'clock, your phone, your video game, whatever, is getting turned off. You're not going to play it until 1 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
If you want to sit in your room and read, have some family time, some family game nights, spend some quality time together before we're back in that hustle and bustle of we need to get homework done and all of that. I think that's a wonderful idea.
And so do you see that as an effective kind of tool for parents to put into play, Denise? Has that been your experience that has an influence on kind of settling into that schedule?
Absolutely.
What would you say to parents who are dealing with high anxious children, whether or not it be kind of the OCD kind of child who's worried about every little detail being perfect, or maybe the ADHD child who has no interest whatsoever in preparing for school. What can we do as parents to better help our children get prepared, whether or not it's communication or I'm not really sure what. We kind of take a lot of the preparation on ourselves, right? We go shopping for the school supplies and we make sure they have everything they need. But what can we do to bring kids into that process and help relieve some of the anxiety or the pressures of going back to school?
I think that communication is important, and allowing your child to communicate their needs to you and really listening when they do. Because so often as adults, we dismiss what our child is saying. You know, the child says, you know what, Mom, Dad, I'm really worried about going back to school because I might have this teacher, and this teacher, you know, the tests are really difficult or something like that. And the parent might say, you don't need to worry about that right now. Don't worry. It's only July. It's only August. I guarantee you that child walks away from that conversation still feeling worried, still feeling anxious, and not a step closer to a resolution. But if you can look at your child and say, you're really worried about that, and that doesn't feel good for you, and the child says, yeah, it doesn't. Okay, that child's still going to walk away, maybe feeling anxious and still worried about the teacher, but you just validated their feelings, and you reflected to them that how they feel is important. And that is the start.
That's awesome. And one of the things that I think a lot of kids that I've experienced have some anxiety over is performance. Do you have any tips on how we can get kids to understand and appreciate doing their best is the best that they can do? I know that my own son, I went to a parent-child meeting, and I took him there, and the administration came in, and they really brought about some serious conversation about how this newly implemented test would be like the pass or fail of their ability to graduate. And they were like in 9th grade. And afterwards, I went up to the administration and I said, oh my goodness, like, way to make them fail. That was even I had anxiety. So I think about the tongue position and the breathing techniques and some of the things that we've taught right down to the tapping that we've learned. There are so many different techniques, but if we could give something to the audience, what would it be when it comes to like that angst about test taking?
Test taking. Well, I really think that it's letting the child know that their worth and value is not reflected in a grade. That if they get an F, it doesn't mean that they are a failure. That means that they didn't meet the requirements for that test, for that information. But it is not a reflection of who they are, their value, or your love for them. But oftentimes, we say we love others unconditionally, but then we add a condition.
Or an expectation.
An expectation, right? And so I think that it starts with teaching self-love for kids to love themselves, even if they aren't the best students in the class.
Well, and I think that's a perfect way to say it. And I certainly, my practice always was, if I've seen you study and I've seen you do the best that you can, then we have to evaluate how you're taking it in and how you're learning and how we can better support you in the process. And I think that makes a huge difference.
And truly, I think even adults will say, we have an easier time learning information that we feel connected to, that we feel a deep connection. It's easier for us to retain, to learn. Right? But when we are learning things that we don't have that connection to, it can be much more challenging to focus, to retain that information. And I think that that's what we see in many of our children who struggle, with math, or they might struggle with a different subject, but they excel beautifully in other areas.
Right.
And I think that we need to focus more with the children on the areas in which they excel, because if we can boost their esteem where they excel, you will see those areas where you may consider them lacking, you will see those improve.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for
You're
sharing,
welcome.
Denise. And like I said, one of the things that we like to do here at the Way to Healthy Living is find kind of simple ways to communicate and tools to put into place. And I think as we're coming into the school year, it's important to acknowledge that we all have a little bit of angst and stress with that coming. And so, very important things. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank
Thank
you for
you.
joining us along the way to healthy living.